No, down there, right in front of you. Charles, go on the other side of the chair. Malefic's book.
book.
Yes, yes.
Textbook.
The textbook. So you have the textbook, and you have the sacred text. And actually, with Maulana Karanga, you have the attempt to go into the sacred text and publish it in English. So you have his Mayat. So these three things I want to be able to link. Malefi Asante, up from Georgia, strong partner of Karanga, Dr. Clark, strong partner of Sheikh Anta Diop, and then the generations to come after him, Brother Kaba. And now he's partnering with Brother Smalls and Tony Browder. They're on the internet all over the world. So this thing is happening. Now with the Wakanda Black Panther influence, that whole network hitting a billion of us is going to be activated. This is the textbook. It's no longer in print.
Wow.
In other words, it's so powerful that you can't have it printed. The people went out of business. If I had money, I would have tried to purchase the business.
Mm-hmm.
But Malefi Asante has for many years been trying to produce his own example of this. And so there is Harriet Tubman, there is Frederick Douglass, there is Martin King, and there is Malcolm. On the other text, they took Malcolm out. And they do have three others on the back, and that's Garvey, Mary McLeod Bethune, and Du Bois. But in later editions, they put Malcolm back in. And so even this text is, but this is an example of what we need: chronology, sociology, timeline, great periods of development. The 350-year periods of history will let us deal with the ancient history, will let us deal with the, and one great era of it with Queen T, and let us deal with the Columbus era, how the European came on the world stage and began to dominate, and let us deal with our current 50-year turning point of history that we've inherited from that Manchester Conference in 45 to the Million Man March in 95. And that Million Man March in 95, for me, was such a spiritual thing. Did you go with us, Charles, that first march? I know Reggie went. Okay. But that Million Man March in November culminated a whole year of activity. The Ashanti King had a 25th anniversary, and it was unbelievable when they brought the golden stool out. And we had a delegation there. Brother Small and I were there. So that 25th anniversary of the golden stool was in 95. 95 was when Trinidad and Tobago wanted to have something with their Africanization of Trinidad and Tobago. So they had this conference on harmony and diversity, and they brought myself in and Professor Small and the Dalai Lama. So that was extraordinary in that 25th year. In that 25th year, in the mountains of Brazil, they had this Wakanda, this free city. Africans fled from the plantations, went into the mountains and created a free city, a sacred space where they could grow and love each other for generations. And that city lasted almost 100 years before they broke through the Portuguese and the Dutch and some spies they had and some traders. But they have this spirit of Zumbi and the resurrection of Zumbi. So I first went there in the 80s. I went to Brazil 88, and I went there 92. 95, I went to Brazil. And what did they have? They had a celebration of Zumbi that had the president of Brazil going for the first time to the mountains, that had the most powerful man in Brazil, Pelé, the soccer player, then the Minister of Culture going to the mountains. They had the strongest black woman, Benedita da Silva, who eventually ran for the mayor of Rio, lost, but then she became the governor of Rio province. These three important black people went up to the mountains with me. And it was at that point that we had a special happening in those mountains. However, in 1995, the big activity, although the government of Brazil took over and said he's going to make it a national holiday, and the president went, and so did Pele, and so did Medici de Souza, and so did my wife and Rosalind and our delegation. But the black Brazilians, the Afro-serious Brazilians, had said, we're going to do something new. Even though the government has taken over our national day, we're going to march from all over Brazil, even if it takes us weeks. And we will meet on November the 30th in the capital, the new capital, Brasilia, Wakanda. And we will be, for the first time, by the tens of thousands, protesting racism in Brazil. And so, even though I was with the president and whatnot, and we were in about, if I had known that the serious black folk were going to march, we would have arranged for us to be there in Brazil. Actually, we did go to Brasilia, and we took this textbook to Brasilia, and the vice president of the Brazil, who was the chair of the Congress, he was running back and forth in the Congress and meeting us in his office and dealing with this book. And he said, this is the history that we should have in Brazil. One of the things he opened up, and my wife did bring these books because she worked on it with Brother Kaba. And so that's why I said his connectedness. One of the things, she was sitting outside with one of these books, and she was talking to a gentleman, and he was all excited because when you open it up and you show Brazil, it shows where quilombos took place in Brazil. And so the brother who was excited, and I don't know whether we gave him the book, I think we couldn't because this might have been the only copy we had. The brother who I saw Rosalind sitting with under a tree, and I said, uh-oh, she done grabbed some good-looking dude, and I'm glad I got down here to make sure nothing happens because she looked excited. Well, she was excited because this brother is the brother who played the lead in the story of Zumbi that was put in the movies. And so he was so excited to know that his movie work was a part of the history book that we were fighting for. So it's just a fantastic story of us and the linkage and the beauty of it. Brother Kaba, when you open this thing up, Malefia Santi had he developed the largest African studies program to produce PhDs. And so he's the editor. He's the spirit behind this. But then you look and you see the acknowledgments and then about the author, and then the reviewers and consultants. And you have Herb Boyd, Brother Outstanding, producing all kinds of work still to this day. Booker T. Coleman, that's Brother Kaba. And then on the other side of them is Dr. Leonard Jeffries. And so this work by the family is extraordinary. And even though we have our conflicts, and even though there's difficulty between Maulana Karenga and Dr. Ben, we still formed an international organization that eventually took 1,000 people to the Nile. You put the personal conflicts aside, you put it on the scale of Ma'at, and you want to be weighing the positive and not the negative. So this has been good, Philip. We had to wait for it. I didn't know how I would handle it, but the next time I want to get into the 350 years, and then the 6 river systems and the 6 historical eras, so that this does not overwhelm people. Because when you get this book, I mean, the first 100 pages is the Dr. Diep speaking to the world scientific community. This is not for you and I. And he takes the world scientific community to the mat, pins them down. He wins that victory. Then in the middle part, he deals with the ecological, the northern cradle, southern cradle. And then he has a little chapter on cultural identity, which may be the most important one. And then he finishes it with the African cradle of civilization in the Nile Valley, with all of the illustrations and whatnot here. Africa's contributions to science, Egyptian mathematics and geometry. And that part 4 is called Africa's Contribution to Humanity in Science and Philosophy. And this work is in that monument in Senegal.
Fantastic.
So
Thank you,
it's extraordinary. So that's why I hope that we get a chance to really, others are doing what they can do based upon their reach. Very few people on the planet have had a reach that I have had.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't create it. That's because I was involved with Africa through this brother, Dr. Robinson. Started working with him in 57, 58 when he started Crossroads, and we were raising money for it in college. 59, I think he didn't have a group, but 60, that's when my wife went. One of the brothers in my wedding went. And then I went. I was in law school then, but I dropped law school. I finished the year, and then 61, I went to Africa. So Africa, and these trips are all significant trips. 61, a couple of times in 62, a couple of times in 63, a couple of times in 64. And then we got married. Then after Malcolm got assassinated, we went to live in Africa, 65 for a couple of years. And so all of that 60 African experience was before there was Black Studies. So when Black Studies exploded, who was ready with the African Black Studies? Had been living it for 10 years like nobody else. And the Jeffries together, and we brought it into the academic arena. But we got to give respect to Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael at that time, and Rap Brown, because when the cities exploded in 66, 67, 68, and when King was assassinated, 125 American cities had explosions. But they went around and they flipped the script. Instead of burn, baby, burn, it was learn, baby, learn. Build, baby, build. And they went to schools and told those students, get organized, plan to protest, plan to put in place programs for your history. And that Black Studies movement just burst in 69 because of their efforts. And I'm the one to give them their kudos because they became my buddies. If I could, I'd go out to the mountain and pull Rap out, you know. And Kwame Ture, the last 3 years of his life was spent right next to me at Clark House. It was spent at Jerry Price's, my staff members, head of our Child Development Center. He finally reproduced this in one of our homes. However, when I took the Dick Gregory kids to Africa in 1970, we went to the mountains of Guinea because Mamou was where I had my work. I went to Mamou in 62. I was head of the group in 63 in Mamou in the mountains of Guinea. And I went, took some people there in 65 and 70. So when we went with the Gregory kids in 70, we went up to Mamou and we met a legend. We met a legend in Paris when we were flying to Africa, and that was Josephine Baker. And then when we went up into the mountains of Guinea, into Mamou, Dalaba, Pita, and on all the way up. In Dalaba, that's where Kwame Ture and Miriam Makeba lived. So we met him down in the capital with the president, but we went up into the mountains to meet her and also to revisit where I was working in 63. Miriam comes out of the mist of the mountains. Her 2-story thatched roof and 5 rooms of red carpeting was what they had overlooking a mountain range. And so when Miriam met these girls, she went crazy too because she had met them when she was in America. And eventually, Kwame Ture and her are married, but one of her other husbands was Hugh Masekela. And so we met Hugh Masekela first in 74. We had rooms next to each other in the Hotel Continental in Zaire. And we couldn't stay for the fight because it was delayed another 3 weeks. And we had to continue our work in Africa. So Roz and I left. But I met Hugh Masekela later, and I asked him about it. He said, yes. I was in the Continental Hotel, and I remember meeting you. And I had to stay another 3 weeks to head entertainment to keep the people in Zaire. And then a couple of years ago, they had 2,000 African heads of state, including Mayor Deakins, the Cuban president, the Bolivian president, Brazilian president, all the Africans from the Caribbean. And at that point, we were celebrating this Africa officially linking with the diaspora. And they had a woman come out imitating Miriam Makeba. And then when they opened the curtain again, who came out? Hugh Masekela in the flesh. And Hugh Masekela was so powerful. All of us started dancing. All of us got up dancing. And that's on the internet, because people from Elmina, where I was installed as a chief, called me one night and were laughing. Usually they call me because they won $100. This time they were laughing. I said, "What are you all laughing about?" They said, "We're laughing at you." I said, "What the hell mean? You're laughing at me?" "We're laughing at you and Mugabe and everybody dancing like crazy in South Africa." So if any of this footage, Gwyneth Mandela in the U.S., when we were praying for her to come into America and she was on the plane, they wouldn't let her in. So we did the libation. We have pictures for it. We could get some footage, but we don't need it. Just put some of this little bit together.
Absolutely.
Real. And we've got an extraordinary opportunity.